You're very welcome to the Ogham Academy podcast. I am Lora O'Brien, Irish Draoi, author and historian, and today we are tackling the single biggest bit of nonsense you'll hear about the Ogham. The idea that it's some kind of ancient Celtic tree zodiac. Let's be blunt, it's not. Never was. But there's a reason that so many people think that it is, and today we're going to talk about where that came from, what the Irish sources actually say, and why this myth just won't die. And look, if you believed it, or believed it up until right this second, or believed it until you listen to the end of the podcast and understand why it's nonsense, there's no shade on you, right? We don't know what we don't know. And this is such a common and pervasive myth about the Ogham that there's absolutely no shame, no blame, no anything, right? But when we know better, we do better, thanks to Maya Angelou, one of my favourite quotes. So, let me tell you about the time that I first ran into the Ogham tree calendar theory. I was in my teens, already kind of leaning into paganism, and someone, probably well-meaning at the time, handed me a book by Robert Graves, The White Goddess. They told me that it would, quote, unlock the secret of the Celtic tree alphabet. I read it. I wanted it to be true. I went to a festival where somebody that I respected from the Irish pagan community had planted a tree circle based on this idea that there's a whole system of Ogham letters linked to trees and months and moon phases and deep feminine mysteries. It sounds perfect, right? Except it wasn't true at all. It still isn't true. The thing about Robert Graves and the long line of authors and supposed educators who followed him is that they were writing poetry, not history, and honestly into the realms of fantasy in many cases. This is imagination, not research, and it spread fast because it gave people what they wanted to believe about Irish tradition, this romantic Celtic fantasy. But it's not what our ancestors actually said or did or believed or understood about the Ogham. So let's look at the facts. We do have early Irish sources that talk about Ogham. The Ogham Nanekis, which means the scholar's primer, is one of the earlier and best known of them, probably. It's a collation of manuscript sections, basically, from different manuscripts. It possibly was compiled in the 7th century Common Era, and it's the first text to explain the structure, the purpose and the lore of Ogham, not in some vague mythic way either, in practical terms. How many letters there are, how they're grouped, what their names are, what their associations are, how they're used. There's a lot about Irish grammar in there as well. Now, yes, the Orakept does say that some of the letter names are trees. Be, for example, means birch. Dar means oak. Sol is willow. And there's no doubt that some feta, and that's the Irish word for the Ogham letters, are connected to trees. But that's not the full story. Out of the 20 original Ogham letters, I believe there's 7 of them that have tree associations, right? Specifically in the names. The full story is that the same text also gives other interpretations. It says that the letters might have been named after people, specifically the 25 most learned people in the school of Phineas Farsai, who was said to have created Ogham after the Tower of Babel. It's one of the origin stories of the Ogham. The other one being that the Tuatha Dé Danann god Oma created it. Now, the Tower of Babel stuff is a medieval legend, obviously. But the point is this. Even the earliest Irish scholars didn't agree that Ogham was purely about trees. So where did this tree calendar come from? Robert Graves, an English poet writing in the 1940s, he took the list of Ogham letter names, the 20 main ones, and reimagined them as 13 tree signs to match a made-up lunar calendar. He squashed the Irish letters into a structure that fit his own symbolic, romantic fantasy framework, and then he filled in the gaps with trees that weren't even in the original Irish system. For example, Graves added yew, vine, ivy, which weren't part of the Ora-kept lists at all. He also assigned each tree letter to a specific month, even though no Irish source ever links Ogham letters to timekeeping. And that's a key point. This so-called tree calendar is not found anywhere in early Irish literature, inscriptions, or legal texts. It is entirely modern fantasy wrapped in poetic language. And let's be honest and give the man his credit. Graves wasn't pretending to be a historian, as far as I know. But people after him took his ideas as gospel, especially in the New Age and neo-pagan movements, when apparently anything old is accurate because it's old, ? But in these movements of the late 20th century, they really took this and ran with it, this Celtic wisdom sticks, tree calendar, zodiac, whatever. And that's how we ended up with oracle decks, websites, and so many books claiming that you can find your Celtic birth tree based on your birthday. It sells, it's capitalised, but it's not tradition, it's fiction. So what do the Irish sources actually tell us? We have lists of letter names, the names of the Feda, given in several manuscripts. Damien McManus has done an excellent paper interpreting the language of these and translating the language of these, plus the Bríthe Ogham, which are word Ogham or kennings, like these short poetic phrases associated with each fee, which is the singular, each letter. We have sources like in Lora O'Brien, the Book of Ogham, which is another medieval text with variants and interpretations. We have pages from the Book of Ballymote, which have multiple different kind of styles of Ogham or ways of using the Ogham, and things like Fion's window, I believe, are in there. And what these sources tell us is that Ogham letters have layered meanings. Some are linked to trees, we have that. Others are linked to parts of the body, weapons, colours, skills. We even have a pig Ogham, right? So yes, trees are in the mix, but not all of them, not as a calendar, and they are not the only associations that we have with Ogham. And more importantly, like, these associations weren't random. They were poetic, metaphorical, tied to the training of the Fili, the elite class of Irish poets who memorised vast amounts of lore. And Ogham wasn't just writing, it was a teaching system, like a memory framework, possibly even a form of symbolic shorthand between poets, judges, the medieval literati. But that's where the real magic lies, not in pre-made charts, in the actual historical and poetic depth of the language itself. What was being done in medieval manuscripts with regard to the Ogham is not matched by a 1940s English guy who was looking at a very fantasy-filled, romantic worldview of quote-unquote Celtic culture. I can't even imagine how anybody would give credence to some random dude in the 1940s from Britain who was writing about this, right? Let's be fair though, I do understand the appeal. A tidy system where each letter is a tree, each tree is a moon phase, each person is neatly matched to one based on a birth date. It feels comforting, like a Celtic horoscope. But it's not Irish, and it's not how our ancestors worked. So if you want to live this fantasy for your personal use, for your personal spiritual belief, go on, have at it, live your best life, right? But in Irish tradition, our trees have their own deep layered lore. and it wasn't systematized in that modern rigid way. And honestly, that's a good thing. Irish tradition is about relationships. And when we're talking spiritual or magical or divinatory, you have to build relationships with the Ogham, with each letter, with any of the associations that you're working with, including colours or, a pig Ogham. It gives us space when we think about the original sources. It gives us the space and it gives us a solid grounding to actually learn and build these relationships rather than just ticking boxes and getting delivered a nice package in a bow, right? So what now? If you've believed the tree calendar stuff, you are not alone. Many people started there. The important thing is to move forward with eyes open and ears open to the real tradition. And if you're teaching others, I'll be very blunt, do not pass that stuff off as Irish tradition. Again, you can do what you want in your own time, whatever, but take the name Ogham off your lips, honestly. We have enough falsehoods, we have enough nonsense and fantasy crap in the global mix, and we really don't need any more. We don't need anybody else adding to this, right? Use your voice to correct it, hopefully, gently if you must, but do it, because Ogham deserves better. So here's something you can do that is actually meaningful. Find a tree near where you live. It doesn't matter if it's one of the quote-unquote Ogham trees or not. Spend time with it, sit beneath it, just observe. If it does match one of the actual historical Ogham fees, say an oak for dar or a birch for be, learn the Irish name, look up the Bríthe Ogham for that fee, for that letter. For example, the kenning of be is Fiochas Fultcán, which means withered foot with fine hair. There's a couple of different meanings to it, and there's actually a couple of different Bríthe Ogham lists as well, in complete fairness. Now that might sound odd, but it tells us something about birch as a tree of beginnings, early growth, purification, like the rich symbolism that's expressed in these word Ogham, these Bríthe Ogham, these kennings, these small lines of poetry are really important to meditate on, to consider, to be aware of when you're working with each of these letters. So jot it down in your journal. What qualities do you observe in that tree? How does it move? How does it sound? How does it feel? What stories might it carry? That's the kind of connections our ancestors would have understood. Not a prefab calendar, but living relationship. So tiny ritual, short one. Stand with your hand on this tree that you've been sitting with. Say out loud, you are not a symbol, you are a being. I meet you as yourself. I seek right relationship. That simple. And then breathe, listen, be open, and see what comes. So that's us for today. Thanks for walking through the weeds with me to find the actual roots. And if you'd like to see the Ogham letter shapes for yourself, including the ones that actually do link to trees, download the free visual guide at ogham.academy/guide. That's ogham.academy/guide. It is a clean, source-based tool that you can keep handy. If you're enjoying the podcast, you know the drill. Subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone who's ready to unlearn and relearn. And we're going to move forward, I think, with looking at Ogham and the Irish language and how the letters connect us to names, to sounds, and to the voice of the land itself. So, slán go fóill, and remember, authenticity over the aesthetic, always. Slán.